It's been 8 days now since our return from Senegal. I don't know if you realize we had a mission trip in January. Lynn Lockwood, Chris and I went to Senegal on the 11th. We got back on the 20th. They say it takes 1 day for every time zone to recover from the effects of jet lag. And Senegal is 8 time zones away. So today's the day. How you doing, Chris? I think Lynn is actually teaching Sunday school, so we should be okay. I'm still having a hard time staying awake past 7:30 p.m. I think it gets harder as you get older, perhaps. The whole 1 hour for every time zone thing doesn't work. Anyway, as you may know, the purpose of our trip was to introduce representatives from 2 churches in our area to the whole idea and the process of doing mission in Senegal. Thanks to your prayers and to God's help, the trip was very, very successful. And we had meetings with representatives of 2 new villages. As you know, we've been working in the village of Jogale now since 2007, where we met in the village of Mbadjenen and the village of Ndoj. And both of those meetings were very interesting. They went very well. And our local friends from Anacortes and also Okarber, I think they're well on their way to imagining what doing mission in Senegal is like and possible for them. And so it's very encouraging. The trip was great. I've always learned something new about mission and Senegal and God on each and every trip. I've gone quite a few times now. And this time I was especially tuned in to something kind of strange, but it was what was happening every time we were stopped at police checkpoints. Now, this is very common in Senegal. On all the major highways, we have long drives. When we land in Dakar at the airport, we stay one night near there, and then we have this long drive to get out to the bush, out to where we're going. And the highways, thankfully, these days are very good, but every so often, the police set up checkpoints, and they wave in vehicles that they want to talk to. And as long as you have the appropriate documents, there isn't an issue, which was always the case for us. It also helps to have a driver who's retired military, as we have had for the last several trips. It's amazing how often on our stops, and this is what I was noticing, how the officers were smiling or laughing as we drove off. Our driver's name was Musa. He's a great guy. He's in his 70s. He has a wonderful sense of humor. And I heard him once saying to one of the officers, "Well, I'll be checking in with your commanding officer," and the guy was laughing. So, however, we had someone in the van with us the whole time this year. He's one of our partners, one of the missionaries that Mountain View supports. His name is Corey Garrett. And I was asking Corey about getting stopped and what's really going on. And Corey explained that if you don't have the right documents, or if there's something else wrong, you basically have 2 choices. You can choose to receive an infraction ticket, and immediately you have to report to the local authorities, which will take a long time. So you have to go, you have to check in at the city hall or whatever it is, and you have to pay your fine. Or the other choice is that you can pay the officer a bribe, and you can be on your way. And it's done a lot. In sub-Saharan Africa, corruption is incredibly widespread. And when you and I see someone in uniform out and about, we may think, "Oh, this person is there to protect me or help me when I'm in trouble, or especially protect the innocent, or keep peace, enforce the laws, keeping us all safe and honest." That's maybe what we think when we see someone in uniform here. However, in places like Senegal, This is nowhere near the reality. Police are using the laws to line their pockets. Corruption is a way of life in many poverty-stricken countries. And this is the kind of thing being described by the psalmist in verse 2 of our text today. Did you hear it? He says, they utter lies to each other. With flattering lips and double heart they speak. The psalmist looks out at the world, and this is all he sees. No one is left who's speaking the truth. No one is left with integrity. It's as if decent, truthful people don't even exist. Now, as you may know, the saddest part of widespread corruption is that it especially hurts those who are poor and needy. We've seen this especially in places like Africa, where the relationship between corruption and poverty is well documented. For instance, a CNN article from a few years ago stated that in Liberia, which is a country just south of Senegal on the west coast of Africa, 7 in 10 people say they had to pay bribes to access basic services like health care and schooling. And that's according to a global watchdog organization called Transparency International. So this relationship between a lack of ethical integrity and poverty is nothing new. It's been going on for thousands of years. And we actually see it here in Psalm 12. This psalm is what's called a psalm of lament. Have you heard that term before? There are psalms in the book of Psalms that were designed for people to cry out to God. It's thought that this psalm was maybe used in a worship service where the people would say the beginning part and then it was answered by the worship leader. Verse 5 would be an answer. The people would cry out and then God would answer in the voice of the worship leader. It begins in verse 1 with a cry of help to the Lord. And the issue, as we said, is that people say one thing and do something completely different. And in verse 5, we can see that the connection between this and the oppression of the poor and the needy is the main concern of this lament. Corruption and the resulting oppression of the poor and the needy. And as tragic as this is, verse 5 is also when God speaks into this mess. He says, I will now rise up. You see, it's not a hopeless situation. Yes, the poor and the needy have suffered at the hands of liars and cheats, but be encouraged. God is doing something. God is about to do something about it. And we can count on this word from God. It's like purified silver, worth something, says verse 6. In other words, this word comes true. And it has, actually, quite literally. Think about how Jesus came and identified with the poor and the needy. To the point that he took the poorest and most wretched of all positions by hanging on a cross. He died. He was buried. With that in mind, let's read again the words of verse 5. Because the poor are despoiled, because the needy groan. Do you have your Bible open right now? Because the poor are despoiled, because the needy groan, I will now, what? Rise up. And so he did. Ever since that day, Jesus' followers have taken on his life, his death, his way of rising up, and obeying his commands to live out this way of life. And this is what Jesus taught. Listen to some of his words from Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount. I'm going to quote this passage from Matthew 5:48 from the Message translation. Listen to this. In a word, what I'm saying is, grow up. Your kingdom subjects, now live like it. Live out your God-created identity. Live generously and graciously toward others, the way God lives toward you. Can you see this? This is a unique, wonderful kind of integrity. To live out who we are created to be. That who we are on the inside and what happens with our actions is of a piece, is the same. Friends, I believe this is our calling as followers of Jesus. And especially in light of the fact that, comparatively speaking, we are so rich and I wish I could take each of you to the home of our close friend Fatu. There's quite a few of you out here now who have been to Fatu's house. She is, we refer to her kind of as our woman of peace in the village of Jogley. We've known her the longest, and she always welcomes us to her home. Her home, she lives in a hut with nothing. She's among the poorest of the poor in the whole world. Thanks to the generosity of this church, she and her daughter Kine have jobs. They are the custodians of the medical clinic in Jogley. But there's no doubt in my mind that what God has been calling me and Chris to do with our lives is that we exist, we are here in some ways to help Fatu. But helping her in a way that doesn't at the same time hurt her, which is tricky. It's so easy to create unhealthy dependence or false expectations that harm rather than help in the long run. It's easy to take a position of being over someone when actually we're just together. That's what God calls us to. That's what this integrity really means, is to stand with people as equals, no matter what. So when I read Psalm 12, this psalm of lament, I don't see it as a way of asking God to do something about the poor and needy. I see it as a call to rise up with Christ in imitation of Him and care for the poor, to care for the defenseless, the marginalized. To let my heart be broken by the things that break the heart of God. To become a person of integrity, the kind of person who says and does the same thing. To love the world, especially those who are disadvantaged, with open arms, the way that Jesus loved the world. I'm super excited to introduce you all to someone. Her name is Taco, with a K, Tacko. It's looking more and more likely that she will sometime this year, God willing, she'll come to Marysville and pursue her education here in Washington. She is the daughter of a pastor in Senegal, and her father passed away about 5 years ago, and there's been a real effort to see that the children of this pastor can get good education, and Taco has expressed an interest to study psychology, and I started talking to her a couple of years ago, or I guess last year, about the possibility of studying psychology at Seattle Pacific University and maybe doing some work at a community college. Anyway, for our last 3 trips, Taco has been one of our translators. She's 22 years old. She's by far the youngest translator we've worked with. But I want to mention her to you this morning to tell you something that she said on this last trip. We're riding along in the van, and Taco actually paid us a huge compliment, not just me, Chris, and Lynn, but also everyone she's seen from Mountain View. So that includes Caleb, Isaac and Todd Layton, Deward, Walter, Janine King, Becky Kitzman, Cindy Armstrong, Tom Dillon. Have I forgotten anybody who's met Taco? Oh yeah, Debbie. And you were, okay. And also Brenda. So she's talking about all of us. She said we all have something in common. That we are, and this is a quote from Taco, that we are the same everywhere we go. In the village, in the city, in the church, in the van while we're driving around. We are, in her eyes, consistent. I just loved that observation from our young friend. She was noticing, what she was noticing is exactly what I'm talking about this morning. Integrity and authenticity when it comes to how we interact with the world, how we live this life as followers of Jesus. Not to say that we've got it all figured out or that we're doing it perfectly, because we're not. We make mistakes. But that we're on our way. We're beginning to live out our God-created identity, rising up and moving from our place of comfort and prosperity to participate with God's mission in the world. This is our calling. This is why 8+ days of jet lag is worth it. It's nothing compared to the privilege of joining Jesus in what he's doing. This is why I want to continue doing this and other acts of obedience to this calling from Christ. And I hope you'll join me. It could look like adopting one needy person in your neighborhood. It could be taking on an hour each week to join me in volunteering at Cascade Elementary. Lots of positions available across the street. I'm just saying. That's great. It's the favorite part of my week. I read with kindergarten kids. It's really fun. You might volunteer at the food bank with our deacons. You might want to adopt a Bethesda School student in our scholarship program. There's a little display right back there. Vicki would love to tell you all about it. She's in charge of that. You can adopt a kid, and it's the students at the Christian school near Jogale. You might even want to participate in a mission trip to Africa. We go once or twice a year. Whatever it is, the point is to follow Jesus in what he's doing in the world. To pray that the words you say and the things that you do line up. Let's pray about that.